Welcome to the show. This is Brandon Wen, and you're listening to the Understanding Consumer Neuroscience podcast, brought to you by the folks at Cloud Army. In this episode, Richard talks to Melina Palmer, behavioral economist and founder of Brainy Business, about her book, What Your Consumer Wants and Can't Tell You, and the various behavioral economic concepts that can be applied to understand what customers do want, and how neuroscience can help you test these concepts effectively.
Hi, this is Richard Campbell. Thanks for listening to Understanding Consumer Neuroscience. And today I'm talking to Melina Palmer, who is the author of What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You, and also the host of the podcast, The Brainy Business. Welcome to Consumer Neuroscience.
Oh, yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Great book. I haven't finished reading it, but I did get it.
Yeah.
And really well acclaimed. Like, people are very excited about it. The title is perfect in the sense that we know this truth as marketers, right? That often what the customer wants is not what they're going to tell you. I love the Netflix story because it's just a great example of exactly that. Do you want to tell it? We want to see the content thing?
Oh, yeah. I'm assuming that we're talking Netflix in the way that they tested their ads. Is that what we're talking about? Or is there a different story that I had in there?
Yeah, where Netflix, their number one request from potential customers of why they weren't buying was that they couldn't see the content, the title.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, with that many people being that excited, it's like, hey, if only I had this, like, this is why I'm not buying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is fun. Okay, I have done so many interviews about the book, and I have not had anyone ask me about this, which is why it was not top of mind. So exciting to get to talk about this particular study. So yeah, Netflix, when we think about any of our businesses, you would think that the study, going out and asking people what they want. And if you had over half of people say, this is the one thing that's keeping them from buying, like, I want this. They all say the same thing. It's something internally you've been talking about for years. The team agrees that they think this is something you should be doing and offering, that you would just, like, we did the research, we asked, let's make it, right? And instead, they took the time, Netflix, thankfully, to do some testing. And it was more to see what was going to be the most effective. In this case, it was people said they wanted to be able to see the content before they signed up for Netflix, to know what titles were available before you bought in. And in this case, really, it's like still probably a free trial, so it's not. Yeah,
it's not like it's even costing anything. It's just an email address. Right.
And so they were looking at and testing, if we compare, control against this version or that version or this version, what's going to work. And the existing experience worked and won every single time that they tested, that actually people thought they wanted to see the content. But when you did, you have this overwhelm, cognitive overload, paradox of choice problem, where you're not sure. And like, oh, well, maybe I want to watch that, but I don't know. And what do these other things have? And blah, blah, blah. But once you've invested in and you have it, you can find something to watch. But all that evaluation, thinking you want to choose something, but it's overwhelming. You think, oh, I'm going to come back later.
And that is the paradox of choice, right? It's like when given too many choices, you do not choose.
Yeah, you just choose to do something else.
but also speaks to, you could look at this as a marketer and just go, your customer just lied to you, right? That they said, if I would, more of us would buy if you did this. And if you had actually done it, it seems like they didn't actually do it. They just tested it. Fewer people would have bought.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, thankfully, in general, we can say that most customers are not intentionally lying to you. So that's good. The problem is they don't know what they want. They don't know what's going to cause them to act or not to act, and what's really happening within the brain. And so understanding those rules, which can be done as a marketer or any area of business. But if you know the rules the brain is using to make decisions, like the ones I talk about in my book and on the podcast, you can then be communicating in a way that's going to just make it easier for people to choose you.
Right. Reducing that friction. And it's interesting to think in terms of, by not showing the content, they made it easier to make that choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to think about the small decision points too, which I have a lot of the content in the book dedicated to this. But we like to think of things often in too big of increments, that we'll say, I'm going to send a postcard, I'm sending the direct mail. I'm even going to go snail mail for something, which nobody does anymore.
Right.
And then people will either buy or they don't. There's a lot of stuff
in
that
between
happens.
Those two.
Yeah. That you need to think about those little micro moments because they're full of these nudgeable opportunities to where you need someone to notice the postcard, to read the headline, to read more information, to flip it over, to find what they're interested in, to go to your website, to click on the product page, to put it in their cart, like on.
Well, and all the mistakes they could have made along the way. The headline didn't get them to look further. The look further didn't answer the question in their mind. The call to action wasn't clear. The call to action was missing. Seen that.
Yeah, lot. Yeah,
call to action didn't function.
Right. We sent them to a page that was confusing. They weren't interested enough to not get distracted by Netflix or Instagram or something else along the way. And so if you don't consider each of those little micro moments, then you are going to have a lot of fallout and not know where it's coming from. But understanding the behaviors and knowing that people make 35,000 decisions every single day, if you can focus on those small points, you are going to be miles ahead of your competitors.
So now I'm thinking in terms of where cognitive neuroscience comes into play here. Is it the tests that Netflix ran? Although those don't necessarily need implicit testing or anything sophisticated like that. They just did a straight up old fashioned A/B test on potential signups.
Yeah.
Because this whole idea of behavioral economics certainly seems adjacent to cognitive neuroscience, like that it's the same kind of things. But you really seem to have phrased this more as straightforward business rule.
Yeah, I would say that is the approach that I take to it. And perhaps that's in being an applied behavioral economist versus, on more of the academic side, you're looking at research in a different way. And the type of work that I do is with clients in helping them to reach their business goals in understanding these rules. And sometimes that means working with an academic lab, and I teach through one. And so we have opportunities there, or having great, partners like Cloud Army or however many others that we can bring in to run the right tests to support the behavioral interventions that we either think are happening, the nudges we're looking to make, and we want to be testing something to see if it works. We can do stuff with eye tracking, with facial recognition, with distance to screen and skin response, EEG, all that. Yeah,
which when you get into the hard, the earlier shows here, we got into that kind of very hardcore. We're going to strap up a bunch of folks that volunteered or maybe are being paid a little bit to assess their interest in a product or in a branding. I mean, obviously the Netflix scenario is one of those ones where they got to test that on the website. You can't necessarily do that with selecting a commercial content or redoing a package. By the time you've got it to that point of testing, you're a long way down the path. Presumably, you want to do it sooner, and different kinds of testing will help for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you I like the phrase behavioral economics. I had not seen it around before. Is it new? Like, where do you get it from?
So my master's is in behavioral economics.
Okay, so it's a degree.
Yes. And there are behavioral economists also, of course. So Dan Ariely is in the behavioral economics space. And there is a little bit of discussion amongst the greater behavioral sciences as to where the crossover is, and it's not super, black and white into where they fall. To me, behavioral economics is anything that we are doing where you're communicating with someone, I feel still can fall into economics. And it is because even if there's not money exchanging hands, I'm still selling you on an idea that I need you to buy into. So like I teach a class on change management and internal communication, and it's in our behavioral economics certificate at Texas A&M. And where some people might say, well, that's not economics. It really is, but it's a different type of economies.
The cost of retraining a staff has an economical component, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Persuading folks that this is a good idea to learn this new way rather than just resist. And, it's not them necessarily buying a product, but it's certainly them buying into a process.
Right.
And any political campaign ultimately is, I'm trying to buy into your vote or buy into a vision of how an area will be governed.
Right. Yeah. And so behavioral economics looks into, there's a lot of public policy stuff within the field. You do get a lot of politics, and in that way, a lot of it is because of the people who have become kind of forefront in the program that have worked at the White House or, whatever different departments over the years. So I would say this applied corporate space is the most recent, but it's definitely coming on quick.
Yeah, without a doubt. Now, I'm not going to steer away from retail on this either, because I do appreciate that these various concepts that you address in behavioral economics often tie into kinds of tests we could run. Like you're trying to figure out the framing problem. That does seem like a great set of tests to run to say, how am I going to describe my product and frame my product in a way that engages the consumer?
Yeah. And one of the things I try to do with my podcast, with my consulting, with the book, is helping people to see how they can start to apply it themselves in a responsible way. And what I mean by responsible is, if you think about how many times people would say something along the lines of like, well, I tried Instagram once and it doesn't really work. That's a lie, And so we don't want people to be going out and just saying, oh, I read about framing or choice architecture or anchoring, and I tried it once based on this exact study I read, and I did exactly what they did and it didn't work. But if you didn't consider the context and your business problem and what you were trying to do and the other behavioral factors at play, of course it didn't work.
Yeah. Even the demographics of your customer, like, does that framing make sense for there?
Yeah, absolutely. And saying like, oh, I read this research paper that was about nurses in New Zealand and I'm applying it to lawyers in Texas.
Yeah, you might get different results. I'm just guessing,
Yeah. But taking this so people can responsibly understand how the concepts work. And I choose 16 in the book that I think are the easiest ones to start with and can have the most business impact and are the ones that I use most often with my clients, and that in interviewing tons of people around the world that are in this space, what they've used as well. Framing being one of them. And there's a reason it's the first concept that comes up, as you were talking about. And so this is essentially that how you say something matters more than what it is that you are saying. And my favorite example is, if you imagine you're going to buy some ground beef, you go into the grocery store and there are two stacks that are seemingly identical. The only difference is that one is labeled as 90% fat free and the one next to it is labeled as 10% fat.
Right.
Which one sounds better
to you?
And do we want to buy? And overwhelmingly, audiences around the world, everyone pretty much says 90% fat free is what they want.
Yeah. And
logically,
is it the bigger number or is it the fat free as a phrase?
Yeah, it's more in the fat free and feeling healthy, I think, in a lot of cases. And where, 10% fat, you go, ugh, where's that going? I haven't been able to go to the gym in like 2 years.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't sound good at all. Whereas 90% fat free, you go, ooh, what a great decision I'm making for myself and my family. And logically, we know it's the same thing, but the subconscious brain or non-conscious, however you like to talk about it, is going to interpret that differently. And it makes you want the other one and be more likely to buy it, even though you couldn't tell somebody. And logically, if someone said, look at these and can you tell the difference? And you'd say they're the same. That wouldn't impact me.
Yes.
But push comes to shove in the moment, it definitely does. And
the empirical data would show if you put 10 boxes of each, one with 90% fat free and 10% fat, I suspect the 90% ones would be sold first, even at the same price with the same, everything else identical.
Right. Well, there's a reason now that you have to have that labels are 90-10 or 80-20 is because it was to stop essentially that being a thing, because you want people to have multiple information and show both sides for that. So in any type of business, what I recommend is looking for the great thing about behavioral economics is you could look at everything you're doing, and just because something didn't work, it didn't mean that your product was actually bad or that you've invested in the wrong technology or whatever it happens to be. There might just be something in the way that you're talking about it, that you're talking 10% fat, and you could flip that frame and be talking about it as 90% fat free, and it would be so much more appealing. And look for across your industry, is there anything that the entire industry is talking 10% fat terms? And if you're the only one that can be saying 90% fat free over here, it could be drawing people to you naturally without you having to change your pricing, your products, your services, anything like that.
You mentioned anchoring sort of off the cuff. How do you explain anchoring?
Anchoring is, that our brains tie in specifically for numbers. There are a lot of other types of anchors, but in this case, numbers are the easiest to understand.
Sure, the 90 over the 10.
Right. And so in the case of another grocery store example, there was a test that was done with end cap displays. There was one that read Snickers bars by them for your freezer, and the other said Snickers bars by 18 for your freezer, which everyone can pretty much agree 18 is a lot of Snickers.
That's a lot of Snickers.
And more than what we normally would buy.
My significant other would look at me funny if I arrived home with 18 Snickers bars.
Right. But I'm stocking up the freezer, they told me to. So if you are the marketer that's creating those ads, you would likely feel a little bit uncomfortable about putting 18 on the poster. You'd say that's an arbitrary number. Somebody's going to ask me to justify why I came up with that. And then our logical brain, we're like, then them is unlimited and people could get 100 Snickers bars if they wanted, blah, 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 to make ourselves feel better. And it probably doesn't make that big of a difference anyway. But there was a 38% increase in sales when the number 18 was used instead of the word them on those posters. And it's because of this concept of anchoring, and there's actually framing in there as well. So in the case of them, really when the subconscious is buying and you hear them, instead of this could be 100, is more like a fancy word for zero, right? It doesn't mean anything, and it's not going to make it through that filter. Maybe you get 2. We'll be generous and say you get 2 or 3 because of the them language.
I'm still wondering how many actually bought 18. All we know for sure is they probably bought more.
Well, the way that this would work is you may look at that and go, 18, I'm way better than everybody else. I don't need 18. I'll just get 6.
I've got control.
Right? Yeah. I'll just get 6. I'm better than you. But that's still more than what would have happened in the other scenario. This is also, people buy more when things are labeled as 10 for $10 instead of $1 each. That's a frame as well. And so in that, though, like I said, so the anchor is the number that helps you to adjust off of. Then behind those statements on the ad, there's a subtle framing difference in the question that you are asking. So in the first one with them, you're kind of asking people, do you want to buy some Snickers? Would you like some Snickers bars? In the case of 18, you have more of an assumed sale, and it's a question of how many do you want to buy? And so that slight frame adjustment hits the brain in a very different way and impacts that buying behavior. And it's, again, thinking about the behaviors and the actions and everything, being just very thoughtful about how you put things together, and it can make
the presumption you're buying. We're only discussing how many, as opposed to are you buying or not. Pretty powerful. And scarcity plays into this equation as well.
Absolutely. Scarcity is one of the 16 concepts that I include, and one that most people are likely very familiar with. So, in general, when something is scarce, we tend to think it is of higher value and it's, worth going in and getting. One of my favorite examples, though, to tell people about is just to know that, quantity isn't the only scarce resource. And where you have a lot of people working in service industries and things like that, and you say, well, I don't have, a certain inventory, but your time is very scarce as well. And so if people have issues with people booking whether you call it a discovery call or whatever, this free consultation or whatever. You have a lot of people that ghost you in that process. Perhaps if you're trying to tell people, I'm super busy, you want to say it's really important that you keep to the meeting, and here, use my scheduling software, and every single 15-minute increments all day, every single day is open. You go,
not that busy.
Right. Whereas if you're thinking you're maybe I want to go check out this person and talk to them about some consulting, and you go to the calendar and there are 2 days open this month and only 2 time slots, you go, ooh, better grab that real quick.
Now. Yeah.
Yeah. And then because we're a herding species, that's an act of social proof to say other people are doing this as well. So it may be uncomfortable for people to not have all those time slots. We feel like people are going to think I'm being so rude, or, I have to have all this availability. But actually that can really work against you in making it so people don't value your time as much if it's not seen as scarce.
Well, and time is the only truly restricted commodity we have, right? Everything else we can get more of.
Right.
The latter part of your book, you get into this section called Don't Get Stuck.
Yeah.
So, spending time in marketing, it's very frustrating at times. Like you do get caught in why is this not working? Like that problem space.
Yeah, there's definitely that. And it's a very short. So part 4 of the book is 8 pages long.
Wow.
That's the don't get stuck, that little bit there at the end. And it really is about, we've all had that experience. You listen to the podcast, you read the book, you go to the conference, and you're in this, oh man, mind blown. I am so excited.
Get all these ideas.
Yep. When I get back on Monday, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm also starting my diet, and I'm going to exercise more. And all these things that are going to happen on Monday. Monday comes and you get well, I just have to catch back up on my email and this and that. And you get into the old rigmarole, and all those ideas sit in a notebook and never get opened again. And so I don't want people that are reading the book, it's giving you all these tools and resources to be able to go out and do the things that you read about, start doing your own testing. And, sometimes you want a partner, but it has examples in there for a lot of things people can be doing on their own to implement some of those tactics. And I don't want you to get stuck in that trap. So it talks about different biases within the brain that are where you're kind of hardwired to have that impact. But if you're aware of them, and there are a couple of things that you can be doing based on that advice, to where you'll actually take on the stuff that matters and go forth and be your own budding behavioral economist.
Sure. Well, and press against any of those things. I think of Mark Twain's quote, "It's not what you know, it's what you know ain't so." Like that, it's those assumptions you've made. And if you go through and challenge all of those, a lot of that stuff breaks loose. It's just hard to think about your own assumptions.
Right. Well, and our brains too. So we all tend to do something called bike shedding, which is, I'll explain for anyone who's not familiar, but in software, I know that comes up
all the time
quite a bit. Yeah. So in bike shedding, there's the big problem we should be working on, but it's kind of scary and there's a lot that could go wrong there. And so we end up really focusing on this little thing that feels like the most important thing. And we say, well, I can't get to this big thing until I can figure out this little item. And you spend an inordinate amount of time working on that little thing.
Right.
But if you understand bike shedding as a concept and are able to say, well, I can't do the test until I read 86 more papers on herding and loss aversion and anchoring and this and that, and get all these other books and do this and do that. And we better update our testing system, and we should look at this and that first, right? All these things that you keep putting in the way before trying something that is different and new. And because the subconscious likes predictability, it's going to put those things in front of you to make you think they're really, really important, but often they're not. And so if you know that change is going to make your brain want to bike shed, then you can be on the lookout for that and just say, no, I'm going to move forward and I'm going to make a test. And it can be something small. I'm just going to do something. And that's better to just get over that hurdle.
I don't know that there's any other way to get better at it than to just make a few tests and expect the first few to be not that good.
Right. You know? I use the analogy in the book. I call it behavioral baking. Mm-hmm. And if you were going to start baking, in the same way where you wouldn't say, I tried baking once, it doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
Right? It's not real. My cake was dense.
Yeah. Everybody's first pancake, not that good, right?
Oh, yeah.
Every time you make pancakes, first one's not that good. It gets better.
That's why they have infomercials. There are products to help with that, right?
Clearly.
For everyone who can't flip a pancake.
Just let the first pancake go. The later pancakes will be fine.
Right. And so you need to know the ingredients, what they do, because eggs, butter, sugar, flour can combine to make all sorts of things. Yes. And so you want to know what they do and when you're putting them together, so you have some idea of that. And then you have to know what you want to make, because, if you're just throwing all those ingredients in and like hope it's going to be good, you're not necessarily going to get your cake or brownie or cookies or whatever you're trying to make. Mm-hmm. And you can expect that maybe the first cake's going to be a little bit dense or soupy in the middle or something. And you can learn from it, even if you start from like a box cake mix, but you're going to use recipes
and you're going to work your way through it.
Right. And so that's where the book has these 16 concepts, which are like ingredients. It tells you a little bit about them individually, what they are, why they matter, how they can be implemented on their own. Part 3 of the book, which starts with that behavioral baking and works all the way through into running tests, is talking about ways you can be combining them together for recipes, like pricing strategy and presenting things on your website, products and things together on a menu, things like that. So you have kind of your box cake mix to give you some examples of how you could start using those together, and then just, go try something. Right. And eventually you can sprinkle in, your other spices as you get more comfortable and start making your own stuff from scratch. But you want to start with the box cake mix, and the book gives you that.
Put as many guardrails around you as you can the first time. And you can take a few down as you get better, more practiced at it.
Yeah.
Understand more of the pieces to it. Mm-hmm. So the podcast is thebrainybusiness.com. Where can we get the book?
Yeah, so there is lots of information on thebrainybusiness.com. You have the podcast, stuff for my speaking, consulting, and the book is there as well. And for all of these listeners, if you want to go to thebrainybusiness.com/cloudarmy, you can get the first chapter of the book for free. So you can see, if it fits your style and it's something you're going to want to read. I like to, give that out. That's reciprocity.
Nice. Well, isn't that one of the behavioral economic?
Indeed it is. Yeah.
So share a little and maybe you'll share back. And
absolutely.
Certainly get some experiences. Melina, really fun to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
And thanks for listening to Understanding Consumer Neuroscience.